June 23, 1945, 9:38 a.m. Mustangs of the 47th Fighter Squadron take off from Iwo Jima. They're on a very long-range mission to strafe an airbase north of Tokyo, helping to eliminate the threat of air attack to American bomber groups. Lieutenant Robert Scamara flies element lead in a flight of 4.
We didn't have to be tight formation, but I flew pretty close for something to do to keep me awake, because I had trouble keeping awake.
The thing that's exhausting about the Mustang is not that you're strapped in and it's too hot or it's uncomfortable, it's the noise. The noise is just absolutely wears you down.
Once over the mainland, the monotony fades. The 4 Mustangs of Scamara's flight prepare for battle.
We flew up and headed west, expecting to find this airfield loaded with airplanes, and we were going to strafe them. But instead, they were airborne.
7 Japanese fighters are at 9 o'clock low. 17 more are at 7 o'clock high. And one of them is targeting Scamara.
I see these tracers come by past my cockpit, and that's when I broke formation, which was a no-no. You don't break formation, but if somebody's shooting at me, I don't care what the regulation was, I was going to get out of there.
Scamara and wingman John Scanlon break hard left as the sky erupts into a blazing curtain of tracer rounds.
From there on, it was just a big dogfight, one plane after another.
A 0 appears off Scamara's nose. The P-51D is among the first aircraft equipped with a lead computing gun sight, the gyroscopic K-14.
You're supposed to know the wingspan. You guessed 37 feet or whatever, you punch that in, and it was supposed to self-lead it. So all you do is put the dot on the plane.
Scamara's gun sight makes it so a quick burst is all he needs. The wounded 0 limps from the fight. Then, Scamara spots 2 Japanese N-1K fighters, nicknamed Georges, at 9 o'clock low. The N-1K was the most advanced Japanese fighter, posing a real threat to any American in the sky.
I said, if that situation happens, there's 2 planes, I'll head for the leader, you head for his number 2 man. Well, I was closing in on the leader, and he wasn't shooting at the wingman. He dove down, and I took off after the leader. And I caught him in nothing flat and shot him down.
Splash 2 for Scamara. His strategy is to strike fast and move often.
I made short bursts, because one thing, I didn't want to burn up my guns, and the other thing, I didn't have to, because the Japanese planes weren't armored. And they were easy to shoot down. There was no problem there.
Scamara engages several more Japanese fighters, damaging 3.
Seemed like every place I pointed, there was a Japanese plane. It just didn't take much maneuvering to get from one to the other.
But suddenly, tracers streak over his canopy. A Ki-84 Frank, the fastest fighter in the Japanese arsenal, is diving from 6 o'clock high. Scamara brakes hard left. The Frank pilot's mistake is going too fast. He overshoots, pulling up into a climb. Scamara reverses and pitches up, straining to put the Pipper on target.
I remember pulling up, and here was that gun sight was down on my cowling, and I couldn't get enough lead on him, so I practically stalled out.
Samar manages a short burst before he's forced to dive away. The burning Japanese fighter plummets right past his nose. Splash 3. Samar scans the sky once more.
I thought one Japanese plane was out ahead of me. As soon as he seen me coming, he split-assed over and dove for the ground. Well, I shouldn't have done it, but I followed.
Samar dives after the lone Oscar, but he begins to worry about his fuel state.
Well, I said, the heck with him, and I thought, let him go. And I pulled back up, using my airspeed to gain as much altitude as I could.
After all the maneuvering, the other Americans are nowhere to be seen. Samar is alone. Then he catches sight of something off his left wing.
That's when I noticed Chandelle was still on my wing. I hadn't noticed that up till that time.
Incredibly, Samar's wingman has stuck with him through every twist and turn. Samar decides to head to the rally point.
I put him out on mutual support, which you don't talk to. You wiggle your tail, and away he goes, and he flies about a quarter mile parallel to you. So he can watch my tail, I can watch his tail.
They don't get far before Samar spots trouble behind Scanlon. A 0 right on his tail.
I turned toward him, but I couldn't make it. I yelled at him over the radio to do something. There's a Japanese plane coming down on your tail.
But it's too late. The Zero's 20mm cannons pummel Scanlon's wings. They burst into flames.
He jettisoned his canopy and he bailed out because his cockpit must have been pretty hot by then.
Samar circles his wingman's parachute, shooting at any Japanese planes that come within gun range.
But I kept firing at them, keeping them clear, and pretty soon 4 of my guns went blank. 2 of them were still firing, but that's 2 of them had maybe 100 rounds more than the other 4.
There's nothing more he can do for his wingman. Samar breaks off and heads for home. He lands back on Iwo Jima after 8 hours and 17 minutes with 6 empty guns. Remarkably, his internal fuel tank still has 54 gallons of fuel. Samar is credited with 3 kills and 4 damaged. Tragically, John Scanlon would not make it home alive.
Maybe 3 years later that I happened to notice this little article in the newspaper, 2 or 3 women that were acquitted of war crimes. And their war crime was releasing Scanlon from the infirmary to a civilian mob that was demanding them to release him to them. Well, they released him to him and they lynched him. And that's how I found out what happened to him. I'd have gladly given them back their 3 victories just if I could have saved John, but it didn't happen that way.
The Mustang made a significant contribution to the Allied victory in the Pacific, sweeping the skies of most Japanese fighters that threatened American bombers. February 16, 1944, dawn. Waves of Hellcat fighters speed toward Truk Atoll. Their mission? Destroy enemy shipping in the highly defended Japanese stronghold. 25-year-old Lieutenant J.G. Alex Vrashew flies with a division of 12 Hellcats from the aircraft carrier Intrepid.
This was a mission that had us going against an enemy that we weren't certain of, but we felt confident. And I guess that's what a fighter pilot's supposed to be confident or he can't do his job.
Truk Atoll in the Caroline Islands is Japan's main anchorage in the South Pacific. They've been fortifying the atoll with port facilities and runways since the end of World War I.
Truk was billed as almost impregnable, their version of Gibraltar or Pearl Harbor, and the propaganda was very strong that Truk would be an incredibly tough fight.
The barrier reefs that surround Truk put the atoll out of range of the battleship's big guns. The only way in is by air. 72 Hellcats from 6 carrier air wings will swarm in to eliminate the enemy fighters.
This was going to be an attack of annihilation. So what you're seeing with the Truk raid is a systematic approach to taking a substantial shore bastion and reducing it to nothingness.
Pure fighter sweeps are rare. Hellcat pilots are anxious for a raid unencumbered with bomber escort.
It was the first time we didn't have to escort, and we were just pure fighter, we call ourselves. And as we got closer and closer to it, and being in the plane that we knew we could handle, I'll tell you, quite honestly, we were looking forward to it.
Vrashu and his wingman, Lou Little, bring up the rear of their 12-plane formation. As they fly the 90 miles from their carrier, they stay low to avoid enemy radar. Approaching the atoll, they climb to 13,000 feet. The higher altitude gives them better visibility and positions them for diving attacks.
You want to have an altitude advantage because altitude can be translated into airspeed with a dive.
The enemy has scrambled fighters. The Americans haven't spotted them yet. Vrashu's flight noses over to start its strafing run on the enemy airstrip.
First 10 had already started their dive going down, and we were just preparing to, but I just took a looked back over my shoulder, and that's when my mind was quickly changed.
There they are, 3,000 feet above, a swarm of Japanese Zeros, closing fast from 7 o'clock. Vrashu radios the other Hellcats, but they're already diving. He must stay and fight.
I couldn't continue because then I'd have a stream of Zeros right behind us while we were going down.
Vrashu and Little are here. The other Hellcats are here diving. The Zeros attacking from above. If Vrashu dives, the Zeros will be on his and the squadron's 6 o'clock. Perfect attack position. His only option is to turn sharply into the enemy, minimizing his cross-section and reducing his time in the Zero's gun sights. Vrashu and Little pull a hard left turn and focus on the lead Zero.
He was already starting to shoot. I could see the twinkle of the guns. So I headed towards him and made a burst, a fast burst just to discourage him, and he stopped his run and just kept going down. They had a habit that they weren't afraid to attack, but once they were countered, they'd dive down for the water.
The first Zero darts away, but immediately another swings around on Vrashu's tail. The Americans counter by pulling up into a steep Chandelle. They're relying on the Hellcat's superior power, large wing area, and strong airframe to push them through the high G maneuver and turn the tables on the Zero.
The Chandelle maneuver, it's basically a maneuver to try and point your aircraft in another direction in a fairly quick method. Instead of just doing a level turn, actually pitch your nose up high, roll over on a wing, and now you can use gravity, or what we like to call God's G, to help you out in the turn, allow you to pull your nose around faster and point in the other direction.
The enemy cranks over hard, trying to stay behind the Americans, but the Zero can't hack the severe turn. He stalls. The Hellcats roll over and get behind the falling Zero. They're primed for the kill, but more Zeros speed in from above.
I had ideas to try to follow him, but there were still some planes above me. I had to get them out of my back.
He doesn't want to be fighting anybody that can be sitting up on a perch 2,000 feet above him, who can then instantly dive down, pick up energy, and now have an advantage on him on a turn. So So he wants to bring the whole fight down low if possible, to beat everybody down to the same state.
Vrashew and Little must neutralize the enemy's numerical and altitude advantage. They snap into a classic defensive maneuver, the thatch weave. In the thatch weave, the two Hellcats swing back and forth, providing mutual support and protection. Frustrated by their inability to score decisive hits, the Japanese move down to the Hellcats' altitude. It's a fatal mistake. The Americans break their defensive formation and seize the advantage.
Up until that time, we were purely defensive. Once they came down to our level or below, then we were able then to go on the offense.
The Americans have skillfully turned the tables. Now the Zeros are vulnerable to the powerful and highly maneuverable Hellcats. What ensues is the dogfight equivalent of a brawl, and the winner determined by who can line up the first burst. Vrashew turns hard on an attacking Zero. The Japanese pilot dives to escape.
One of the favorite Japanese techniques, if engaged and in a defensive position, was to try to dive away and try to head for the water.
The technique worked with the Wildcat, but not with the Hellcat.
Once he caught on fire, okay, he's gone down. You're looking for another one. You just go from one to the other and hope you get a dozen of them.
Vrashew draws a bead on a second Zero. The enemy tries to dive away, but the Hellcat easily catches him. It's Vrashew's second kill of the day. Then he spots a roof, a float plane version of a Zero. Again, the enemy dives away. Vrashew is relentless. His job is to sweep the enemy from the sky.
And once I got on their tail, I didn't let go.
Kill number 3. Vrashew spots another Zero at 12 o'clock low.
I started to try to get in position, but he wouldn't let me. He kept ducking into a cloud.
The Zero is running from cloud to cloud, so Vrashew calls on a basic dogfighting tactic.
I'm not going to let the SOB get away. So I just pulled up and kept looking for him while he was ducking in and out, and got in position to where I figured he couldn't see me. I pulled up into the sun and waited until I got a good shot, and I came down on him from 5 o'clock. I don't think he even knew what hit him.
Vrashew's 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds slice into the Zero's wing tank and cockpit. Vrashew's 4th kill of the day plummets in a flaming spiral. The American fighter sweep continues throughout the day, turning the skies above Truk into a swirling vortex of gunfire and flame.
There were loose fights all over the place. Those planes going down one every 30 seconds. This was a wild dogfight, a wild one.
The Americans are unyielding. The fierce combat costs the Japanese 130 planes in the air and another 74 on the ground. October 25th, 1944. American pilots from Taffy 3's small carriers take flight in a desperate attempt to stop the Japanese center force from annihilating their ships. These fighters and dive bombers are armed for ground attack and anti-submarine duty. Their weapons are virtually useless against the giant Japanese ships.
Many of them armed with nothing other than depth charges or machine gun bullets, in some cases almost nothing at all. And their job is to bear down that center force and do something, anything, to prevent their carriers from being run down like dogs on a highway and slaughtered by these massive ships.
Lieutenant Richard Roby flies with a division of FM-2 Wildcat fighters from the escort carrier Gambier Bay. The 24-year-old pilot maneuvers his fighter through a maelstrom of flak.
You don't get scared. You get scared afterward, not during.
Roby noses over from 1,200 feet, strafing Japanese destroyers with his .50 caliber machine guns.
I aimed at the torpedoes, which are midships, because if I put the torpedoes out of existence, that put them basically out of existence.
Soon, sister escort carrier groups Taffy 1 and 2, located 30 miles to the south, scramble their Wildcats and Avengers to assist. By 7:15 a.m., hundreds of Allied aircraft fill the sky. Their courageous efforts succeed in forcing the Japanese ships into defensive maneuvers. This break in the attack allows the destroyers Hole and Heermann to launch torpedo strikes. Heermann's torpedoes miss their intended target, but streak toward Yamato. The Japanese flagship turns hard to avoid the incoming threat. From the cockpit of his FM-2 Wildcat, Richard Roby spots the retreating Japanese flagship and moves in with his .50 calibers.
I started shooting at the anti-aircraft positions on the foredeck because they're unprotected. They're just out in the open. But then eventually I got to the point I couldn't bear on them because I was too low. That's when I shot at the bridge. I stopped firing because I ran out of ammunition.
Surprisingly, after the air and torpedo assault, Yamato does not rejoin the fight. But Kurita's center force still wields plenty of deadly firepower. At 7:35 a.m., the tiny American destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts enters the fray. She heads out on a torpedo run towards the heavy cruiser Chokai. Under cover of smoke, Roberts advances to within 2.5 miles of Chokai.
We could see his two front 8-inch gun turrets turning toward us. And I swear to God, it looks like he was coming right between my eyes.
Chokai fires 8-inch projectiles, each weighing nearly 300 pounds. But Roberts has moved so close, the Japanese cruiser can't train her guns low enough. The shells fly overhead. Roberts sends 3 24-foot-long Mark 15 torpedoes, knifing through the water at Chokai. They score a direct hit on the heavy cruiser.
We didn't know any better, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. We were cheering like it was a baseball game.
Then, Roberts lashes out with her only remaining weapons.
We started now dueling with them with our 2 5-inch gun. That's all we had left. A 5-inch shell would bounce right off their hull. So our 2 gunners were aiming at the upper works.
For 60 incredible minutes, Roberts slugs it out against adversaries 10 to 30 times her size. She fires more than 600 rounds of 5-inch ammo. But at 8:51 a.m., Roberts shudders under the first of several devastating hits.
We took a salvo of 6 8-inch shells on the gun that's like mine up front, only in the back, 40 millimeter in the back. When the smoke cleared, we found out through our gun captain that 42 gun is gone, disintegrated, gone. We knew all our shipmates. I knew two boys pretty close in that gun back there. And all I could do was think of those guys, they're gone. And that's when we knew that this is it. This is a fight to the finish.
In a furious last stand, the Roberts aft 5-inch gun the only one left, sets the cruiser Chikuma's bridge afire and knocks out her number 3 gun turret. Moments later, 3 14-inch projectiles from the battleship Congo impact the Roberts. A 40-foot hole is ripped open on her port side near the waterline.
You could drive a semi-truck through there. And we're taking on water, tons of water were going in. Somebody yelled down, "Abandon ship! Abandon ship, every man for himself."
At 9:35 a.m., Usen and his shipmates abandon ship and pray for rescue. 30 minutes later, Samuel B. Roberts, the courageous ship known in Navy lore as the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, slips beneath the waves. 89 sailors go down with the ship. The tin cans of Taffy 3 are succumbing to the withering firepower of the Japanese Armada. Now, the light cruiser Yahagi leads 4 destroyers on a torpedo run against the crippled flat tops. The only American ship in position to stop them is the battered USS Johnston. The Johnston opens fire with her few remaining 5-inch guns.
Anytime we could get keyed in on something, we fired. And we kept firing as long as we could possibly could.
Captain Evans orders Johnston to proceed full steam ahead, attempting to cross the T on the Japanese column. Crossing the T is a classic naval tactic, where a ship crosses in front of an enemy so she can fire all her guns, while the enemy can only fire its forward armament. But before Johnston can fully cross the T, Yahagi unexpectedly turns sharply to starboard. The destroyers follow.
All of a sudden, they start turning one after another. Well, we had an idea then that something was up, and it was probably a torpedo type, but their position was so bad that there was an element of doubt.
The Japanese fire their torpedoes. The Japanese Type 93 Long Lance is one of the most successful torpedoes of the war. With a maximum range of 20 miles and 1,000-pound explosive charge, it could sink a warship with a well-placed hit. As with all torpedoes, speed, range, and running depth must be preset. But the Johnston has caused the Japanese to fire prematurely, before making proper adjustments. The torpedoes miss their mark. Again, Johnston has saved the carriers, and again, she pays the price. The 5 Japanese ships bear down on the lone destroyer. Johnston staggers fire among her attackers in a desperate but futile attempt to stave off the inevitable. At 9:10 a.m., a deadly fusillade rakes the ship.
The really turning point was the gun 52 was hit, which was right and direct to the bridge. Well, it killed practically everyone in there, set 5-inch ammunition cases on fire, clouds of smoke.
Finally, Johnston's damaged engines falter and quit. She's dead in the water. Enemy destroyers encircle the crippled ship, firing relentlessly.
The ship was just taking so many hits that they couldn't patch the holes fast enough, and just impossible to keep her afloat.
At 9:45 a.m., 2 hours and 45 minutes into the battle, Captain Evans gives the order to abandon ship. 25 minutes later, the Johnston sinks beneath the waves. 186 of her crew are lost. But incredibly, Johnston and Taffy 3 have achieved the impossible. Admiral Kurita has signaled the 20 undamaged ships in the center force. Return home. Thanks to the determination and courage of the American sailors and airmen, MacArthur's invasion force at Leyte is saved. The battle is over. David has felled